Welcome to Channel 24. In the face of ongoing Russian aggression, Ukraine continues to demonstrate resilience and determination. Recent developments on the front lines and in military strategy highlight challenges and advancements for the Ukrainian armed forces. Austrian military analyst TomCooper is joining us online to talk more about vital topics in this war. Hi, Tom.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to be with you, Natalie.
Tom, let's start with the situation on the front lines. Is there any good news for Ukraine? Any breakthroughs?
Well, on the front lines, not really.
Why are you smiling?
I'm smiling because it's kind of ironic, and I guess you're going to ask me about this later on. But, if you talk with troops who are fighting the Russians, you hear entirely different things from them than you hear from higher ranks, from especially from ranks above the brigade commanders. Brigade commanders are desperate and sorry, not brigade commanders, but higher ranking generals are kind of desperate, and they have only problems, and they see problems everywhere and have no solutions. While troops on the ground who are fighting Russians, they have lots of solutions, lots of ideas. They are often in very good spirits, regardless how fatalist. So it's, like you're talking with two different forces, not only with Ukrainian, but with somebody else as well. That's why I'm smiling, excuse me.
No, it's fine. We will go and we'll move forward to that point you mentioned. But just about the latest thing that's happening on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm. More or less, the last 3 weeks, we have seen the Russian offensive slowing down. Especially in Pokrovsk area, where Drapati has taken over. As you see, I have to smile as soon as I mention General Sirski. General Sirski has given command over the Pokrovsk area to General Drapati, and General Drapati has essentially stopped the Russian advance in that sector. So this is good news. While further south, already in Andreevka sector, General Sirski is still in command, and there is a big problem with 6 Ukrainian brigades or elements from 6 Ukrainian brigades de facto surrounded from 3 sides by the Russians. And the things are very critical over there. So, it's balancing each other. In other sectors, for example, because Sirski is so busy with Andreevka sector, he is not taking care about Kupiansk sector, and therefore the Russians are expanding their bridgeheads on the western side, north of Kupiansk and south of Kupiansk. But this is expansion, of 100 meters a week or something like this. So theoretically, if anybody in Kiev would come to the idea to send a few reinforcements to Kupiansk area, these bridgeheads could be destroyed, or at least the Russian advance and apostrophes in these areas could be stopped. But this is not happening. And then you have Kharkiv and Kursk. In Kharkiv, the Ukrainians are holding the front line, even liberating some ground. And in Kursk, the Russians are assaulting now anew, also deploying lots of airstrikes over there and really hitting the Ukrainians very hard. So it's not simple, and Ukrainians are slowly losing the ground in Kursk. So, well, we are going to see what happens over there.
Yeah, Tom, we will unpack all the things you mentioned slowly, but I know that you're quite critical about General Sirski, and I know you advocate for military reform during wartime, as far as I understood. Yes. How long could this take, and what potential outcomes might it yield?
Well, the point about military reform is to improve the efficiency, combat effectiveness of the Ukrainian armed forces. If your troops are better trained, they're fighting better. If they're better commanded, they're fighting better too. Right now you have about a dozen of brigades in the ZSU, in the Ukrainian army, which are well trained and well commanded and which are fighting well, but the rest is not. The rest lacks training, the rest lacks command skills, the rest lacks equipment and everything else. And this is the responsibility of the top commander on top, Glavkom, and the general staff of Ukrainian armed forces. They are not doing their job. They are from my point of view, incompetent, proven as incompetent repeatedly, and therefore the situation is not improving. And that is the primary problem. Because of this, you have also troubles with recruitment and mobilization. Because of this, you have a problem with utilization of equipment you're receiving, with utilization of ammunition you're receiving, and so on and so on. And this is why your armed forces have such huge problems with trying to stop this Russian offensive, which is now lasting for over a year, actually for 1.5 years almost, since October 23.
So, as far as I understood, our soldiers doing well, but the problem is top generals.
Yes. Exactly. This is why I'm smiling always, because it is silly, really. When you monitor the behavior of Glavkom in particular, and several weeks ago I posted something on my blog, and I listed all the characteristics of his style of command, and this was actually a conclusion based on what I've got to hear over months and meanwhile years. And almost immediately after I posted this, I've started receiving "thank you very much," messages. "Thank you very much. Yes, it's exactly like you have written. It is that and that way." And see, this is precise description of Syrskyi. How is he commanding? He's first ignoring the problem. Then once the problem does appear, then he is surprised by the problem. Then he sends a battalion to solve the problem. Then he is sending this battalion to run pointless counterattacks. Then he gets frustrated by the situation and forgets and abandons it and refocuses his attention somewhere else. And he is never learning a single lesson from any of his mistakes. And I said, this is what is resulting in very poor effectiveness, combat effectiveness of the mass of the ZSU. And this has to change. This is where the reform has to start. A new Glavkom, and then a complete reform of the training procedures, retraining of the entire force. This wouldn't take longer than 6 to 9 months at most. You have enough officers who know how this should be organized, how this should be run. The Glavkom and the general staff have received serious offers from several officers who have told them, "Let me reorganize the entire force, let me retrain the entire force." But they said no, or there is no time for this, or this is not the right moment for that, and so on and so on. And nothing is happening. They're still fighting like they think the Soviets would have fought in, let's say, 1980.
So the way Syrskyi behaving, it cannot be the strategy.
It is not strategy. This is, I mean, if he has a strategy, this is to survive, somehow to muddle himself out of this trouble in which he is swimming all the time. But this is, he's not having no vision for the future of the ZSU. He is not solving any kind of problems. He's just, patching the front line with ever additional battalions taken from brigades from another sector, and creating ever bigger chaos. Not taking care for units, neighboring units to communicate and coordinate their operations. Not taking care to command them. Not taking care to build up reserves. Not instilling the care for soldiers between his subordinate commanders, between especially the general staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Ministry of Defense, and not to talk about so many of brigade commanders who are inexperienced, who lack the command skills and so on. He's doing nothing to improve the situation. He's solely focused on finding out where are the problems. He's always doing that too late. Then he's always reacting in the same fashion. He's becoming extremely predictable for the Russians, which is making their job easier. I mean, you have to imagine this, and this is the top commander of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, and so on and so on. See, he's just causing troubles to Ukraine, nothing else. Troubles, ever continuous losses, heavy losses, unnecessary losses, especially in soldiers, in equipment, and so on and so on. And at the same time, no problem has been solved by him, not a one, over these 2 years he's in command now.
Let's shift a bit of our external, I would say, military operation. You mentioned Kursk. Tom,
yes.
After months of Ukraine did it, how reasonable, how effective it was?
Well, Kursk as an operation, as a distraction or diversion, was a very good idea. Absolutely no discussion about this. And especially had the Glavkom and his staff understood the problems with supplies right from the start, and taken care to open additional routes via Sujba to Korenevo And in order to secure this sole battalion that was sent to capture Korenevo, to have enough ammunition when it was the issue of having enough ammunition, it would have had a very nice outlooks for much bigger success, because the CSU could have taken Korenevo, could have driven further north, could have blocked this entire highway west of Kursk, and with this it would have made Russian counterattacks much more problematic than they are since September. So this was a brilliant opportunity that was wasted. And sadly, meanwhile, also about 600 troops were killed in this offensive, or while defending from Russian counterattacks. Many more have been injured, many of them very badly. And this is once again the same situation like in Bakhmut in early 23, where the best Ukrainian troops are wasted for a case that is actually lost. Because we have seen it already. Zelensky has, via diplomatic channels, offered Putin to exchange Kursk for certain other part of Ukraine, and Putin promptly said no. Why? Because he's convinced he can return Kursk, or completely liberate Kursk on his own, with help of his armed forces, and if not, then with help of North Koreans.
But it's not happening right now.
No, of course it is not happening. I mean, what is not happening is an exchange of terrain. What is happening are continuous Russian attacks. Now the North Koreans are back, and they are slowly, but nevertheless, pushing Ukrainians out of Kursk.
Well, Koreans, it's a huge topic, but me ask you the question about the opportunities we are trying not to waste. The security service of Ukraine continues to strike Russian targets, though without a coordinated strategic approach, it seems. Would you say these attacks have become more effective eventually?
Well, it does appear the last month that they have finally decided to find a focus and to focus on the Russian oil industry. And therefore, they have meanwhile really durably knocked out about 10% of the Russian oil industry, which means primarily oil refineries and oil depots. This is a nice success, great. The problem is this is going to take much more in order to have necessarily massive effects upon Russia. This is going to take some 6 to 9 months at least longer. It is also going to take development of much longer ranged weapons, because you have to hit refineries which are further away. And the more you have knocked out most of those which are close to Ukraine, but you still have to reach those further away from Ukraine. And that means you need not only weapons with the range of 700 to 1,000 kilometers, like you have them right now, but also with 2,000, 3,000 kilometers range. And such weapons are not easy to develop. You know, it's a huge difference between a cruise missile de facto, which is flying 500 or 1,000 kilometers away, and the weapon which is flying 2,000 or more kilometers away. So this is going to take time. Also, the synergy of all of these effects of hitting 20, then 25, 20, 30, and so on refineries, and then hitting them with enough weaponry to knock them out for longer than 2 or 3 weeks, or longer than 2 or 3 months. This is also taking time. So sadly, I said, earlier you had a problem that the SBU was targeting randomly. You know, one day they would target command centers, then they would target ammunition bunkers, then they would target air bases, then refineries, then something else. So every week or every second week they would change the target. Now they are trying to focus, and this is a good idea. So I hope they have enough weaponry to continue this, to keep the Russian oil industry under pressure.
Yes, and what would also taking time, it's jets that we are receiving from our allies. Early this month, Ukraine received not only a second batch of F-16s, but also Mirage fighters from France. What advantages do these French aircraft bring to the battlefield so far? Do you see any success? Do you know?
Well, just for a start, you cannot accelerate the delivery of F-16s or Mirages, because the speed of this delivery is dictated by the speed at which pilots and ground personnel for them are trained, and you can't do this in a matter of 2 weeks. An F-16 and a Mirage 5, Mirage 2000, are no AK-47, so you learn to use it in a matter of 1 hour or something. Okay, so that is the point number one. How are they changing the situation? F-16, I can tell you there are more than 2 batches of them in Ukraine. Meanwhile, I'm not going to go into more specific, but there are more than 2 batches of them in Ukraine. Meanwhile, because they are not only Dutch, but also Danish aircraft and so on and so on. Point is this: the F-16s are lessening the burden on ground-based air defenses, which means they are doing ever more of interceptions of especially Russian long-range UAVs, which are striking Ukraine every night. And in this regard, they're more effective than ground-based air defenses. Why is that so? Because they're more flexible. Ground-based air defenses are, once they are in a position and they can open fire, the mass of systems in use in Ukraine is fixed. They cannot move. And even if they can move, they are tied to the roads and they are moving relatively slowly. And they also have to stop before being set up to open fire again. On the contrary, when you launch a fighter jet like F-16, it's moving at its speed of 100 to 1,500 kilometers per hour as necessary, and you can bring it, better into combat position. On the contrary, but in the case of ground-based air defenses, you have to hope
Tell me,
weapon.
Okay, you had a bad line for a second. Now we're continue. Yes.
No problem. In the case of ground-based air defenses, you have to hope that, usually on the basis of former experiences, you're going to bring your weapon into correct position, into the right position, in time for enemy attack. And then you have to hope that enemy weapons, whatever you want to target, UAVs or cruise missiles or combat aircraft, that they are going to come your way and enter the engagement envelope of your weaponry. In the case of F-16, you can bring the jet into the intercept position and bring the enemy aircraft or missile or UAV within this engagement envelope on your own, because it is moving at such a high speed. On the other hand, ground-based air defenses, they can stay in a position for days, weeks, months if necessary, and if they can survive enemy counterattacks. Jets are airborne for 30, 40, perhaps 60 minutes at maximum, and that's it. Then they have to land in the fuel, and you have to send additional or other jets into the sky. So it is a give and take situation. But generally, F-16s are lessening the burden of available ground-based air defenses. Which is very important because the number of missiles, the stocks of missiles left to Ukrainian air defenses are constantly in decline, which means that the units you still have, you have a bigger number of units, but they have ever less and less surface-to-air missiles available. While the F-16s are coming together with their air-to-air missiles, and there are still significant stocks of these in NATO and in Ukraine. And Mirages, we are going to see what happens with them, but word is that they should be actually not used for air defense purposes, although Mirage 2000-5, which is the version delivered to Ukraine, is primarily an air defense aircraft, but that they are going to be new carriers of Scalp EG. This is the French version of Storm Shadow long-range precision missile, and that they are in the future going to replace the Su-24s and fly these spectacular strikes against targets in Crimea or in southwestern Russia.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Yeah, we're quite limited in time, and I have so much questions to you.
No
but
problem.
I will choose the most interesting. I want to ask you.
Yes, just go on.
Yeah,
I have the time. Don't worry.
Yeah, yeah. Right now, with so much talk about negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, it seems impossible that it wouldn't affect the front line. From your perspective, how is Russian behavior on the battlefield changing as a result?
It's not changing at all. The Russians are going to fight and continue fighting as long as Putin wants them to do so. So this is not changing at all.
No. I mean, maybe they're behaving more aggressively. I mean that.
No. They are behaving like always. Essentially, the Russians, contrary to almost everybody else, including Ukraine, have just one mode for warfare, which is attack, assault. So once you order Russian armed forces into a war, they are constantly running attack. And if they are not attacking, they are at least trying to create a situation where they can start to attack. So they have no other mode. And this is an all-out war. Whether they fight Georgia in 2008 or Syrians in 2015 or Ukraine in 2014 again, and so on. They have only this one mode, which is all-out war, short of nuclear escalation. So absolutely nothing is changing from that point of view. They are still attacking in the same fashion, which is all-out, well, under current circumstances, which means that they have very few tanks, they have very few other armored vehicles left. But that is about the only difference to earlier times. They're still attacking, they're still assaulting 10, 15, 20 times a day, just doing this by other means. Nowadays, it is relatively few soldiers. They send 2 over here, another 2 over here, and another 2 over here, and so on. And then they search for weak spots in the Ukrainian positions. And sooner or later, they usually find them.
Yeah, okay.
Until then, they might lose 200 troops, but that's it.
I see, but what do you think about next one? NATO's military committee chief says Russia won't be able to ignore its heavy losses in Ukraine much longer. Do you think this will force a shift in their strategy? I mean, that's what I've heard recently.
Who matters? Who matters? Who is the only person there is only one person in Russia who matters, and that is Putin. And as long as he does not care about losses, I mean, such talks are wishful thinking, sorry. I mean, by all respect for NATO chiefs and whatever chiefs and presidents and prime ministers and chancellors and whatever else. But the point is, there is only one person in Russia who matters, and that is Putin. And Vladimir Putin is not a kind of person who cares how many people got killed by assaulting Toretsk or Pokrovsk or whatever other place. He simply can't care less. This is just like if you expect that Trump is taking care about public popularity in the United States. He does not care. He was taking care about this in order to get elected. But now that he is in power, he can't care less.
Okay, yeah, and you've heard about yesterday, there was in Paris, there was urgent meeting under the President Macron, and some European, lots of media saying it was a failure, but some European countries are considering sending troops to Ukraine as a part of peacekeeping mission with plans for reassuring and deterrent forces up to 30,000. Okay, how realistic is this, and what impact could it have on the war? And that's going to be my last questions to you.
Natalie, you can ask me 10 other questions. No problem. Let me bring this to the point. Okay.
Limited in this.
The word peacekeeping, no problem. The word peacekeeping contains 2 words: peace and keeping. Okay. So if you want to send peacekeepers somewhere, this means that there must already be peace. Is there peace in Ukraine? I haven't heard of it. And then in order to keep that peace, they would deploy troops on a 1,500 kilometers front line. What should they do there? First, they have to find themselves at all. And second, they need a mandate which is granting them very robust capability to answer, which in turn means they have to have lots of firepower in their hands, and the rights to deploy this firepower. Because if it happens under apostrophes, the Russians shoot at Ukrainians or Ukrainians shoot at Russians, never mind who, doesn't matter who. They must have the right to shoot at either Russians or Ukrainians until this guy stops shooting. And this is not going to happen because nobody is going to send Latvian troops or German troops to Ukraine to maintain peace when there is no peace. And there is no peace because, let's say, okay, Trump and Putin meet each other and they agree they are going to make a ceasefire in Ukraine. You seriously expect that Putin is going to stop shooting? And even if, has anybody negotiated with Ukraine? If not, then why should Ukraine stop shooting? It's as simple as that. Peacekeeping entails a peace, and there is no peace to keep in Ukraine. And there is not going to be any kind of peace in Ukraine until Russians are hit so badly they wouldn't dare anymore attack in Ukraine. So peacekeeping and peacekeeping troops and so on. Excuse me, this is fantasy. This is bubbling about hot air, wishful thinking, and whatever else, but certainly not anything serious.
Thank you, Tom. It's such a pleasure to listen to you. You know, Ukrainian audience loves your blog and how you're writing and analyzing this Russian war in Ukraine. But unfortunately, we're limited in time. So
no problem.
Thank you. There was a war expert, TomCooper from Austria, with us. Thank you, Tom, for your time.